Welcome back to the West Ham Voice. Now, as I said in a recent video, in just under 2 weeks, the mood around West Ham United has changed dramatically. After relegation, many supporters expected panic, and we were prepared for further doom and gloom, where we will probably sell all our best players, and the prospect of an immediate return to the Premier League would have been fanciful at best. Instead, all the good news coming out of West Ham has been wave after wave of positivity after positivity. From the moment David Sullivan left the building, Daniel Kretinsky has taken centre stage. And there's a lot that has been attributed to the Czech billionaire when it comes to what is likely to happen or may happen at West Ham. Increasing his sharehold to 43%, getting the backing of the board for future progress, awaiting confirmation that we all think that Kretinsky has injected further funds into the club in order to keep PSR at bay, talk about keeping our best players, retaining Nuno as manager, and talk of things like a new training complex. And with Karim Varane replacing Karen Brady, we now have a more open and improved dialogue between supporter groups and the club itself. There are even discussions surrounding the possibility of acquiring the London Stadium and the surrounding land in order to transform it into a genuine football home. So the question is this: how much of all this is realistic? And what does Daniel Kretinsky's actual track record tell us about him? Now, being optimistic is fine, and after years of the lies and myths truths, I think it's right for West Ham fans to feel the way we do. But blind optimism, I guess, isn't quite all right. Look, if you're new to this channel, first time you're watching the West Ham Voice, or if you watched the channel before but yet to become a subscriber, a QR code has appeared in the top corner there. All you have to do is click on that after the show, takes you straight to the subscription page. Subscription is free of charge. If you enjoy it, why not become a subscriber of the channel? So, the West Ham fan base has been so desperate for good news. Are we kind of falling now into a state where we want to believe everything that we're told that's supposedly coming our way? Or should we be a little bit more cautious and see how things develop? Now, Simon Jordan seems to think that we're all jumping ahead of ourselves. But then it seems to many West Ham fans that Jordan has got a perpetual downer on West Ham United anyway. So if we're going to be upbeat, let's be upbeat because we look at the evidence to back all the suggestions that are coming our way. Because when we look at the evidence, we should indeed be feeling confident and upbeat. Daniel Kretinsky isn't a man arriving fresh into football. He's been involved with Sparta Prague for over 20 odd years. But his story at that club was not always a complete success. But it's not always been a failure either. When Kretinsky became involved at Sparta in 2004, the club remains the biggest club in Czech football. But since then, Sparta have won multiple league titles and domestic cups. More recently, they've won back-to-back championships and returned to the Champions League. But here's the important bit. It didn't happen overnight. In fact, there were several years of frustration. Years where the Sparta fans questioned some of the decisions made. Years where their arch rivals, Slavia Prague, overtook them. And years where the club made poor managerial appointments and Kretinsky himself received criticism. So what changed? Well, eventually, Sparta Prague modernized. They moved towards data in order to improve recruitment structures. They brought in and delegated footballing decisions to experts, and they invested heavily in the infrastructure itself. But it has had to be a patient build-up to get to better days. Will West Ham fans be patient? Well, let's take one example, the training ground situation at West Ham, which at the moment is quite frankly ridiculous. 3 separate sites, fragmented operations, not exactly the environment of an elite football club. So when reports emerge that Kretinsky wants one state-of-the-art training centre, that actually fits the history of what's happened at Sparta Prague. Major money went into academy and facility projects. Infrastructure matters to Kretinsky, and that's something supporters should be genuinely excited about because there's evidence there to suggest that what he did at Sparta can be done at West Ham. The first team train at Rush Green, as we all know. The academy has got separate facilities at Chadwell Heath. Other departments operate elsewhere. In total, the club effectively works across 3 different sites. That isn't how Europe's elite clubs operate. And increasingly, Daniel Kretinsky's thinking appears to be exactly the same. Now, recent reports suggest that plans for a new unified training complex have been under consideration for some time. So should we give Kretinsky credit for all this? Well, maybe we might give him credit for actually doing something about it rather than it being just under consideration. And things have accelerated following his increased influence at the club. Now, according to X, one possible location has been identified in Basildon or just outside. Now, let's be clear. Nothing has been officially announced. No planning applications have been submitted yet, and supporters shouldn't start expecting bulldozers to start tomorrow. But here's why the story is interesting, because if you look at Kretinsky's history at Sparta Prague, this is the type of project that makes perfect sense. He's not going to throw money around recklessly. He's known for investing in foundations, training grounds, academies, recruitment departments, data analysis, sports science, and we've already heard that he's told the recruitment team at West Ham that they're not under threat of being made redundant. So building clubs from the ground up is something that's important. And if Basildon is indeed the preferred site, then this wouldn't just be a training ground, it would be a proper footballing campus. Footballing campus. But what would a new training campus actually cost? Because people hear state of the art and immediately think hundreds of millions of pounds. But let's put some context around it. Leicester City's Seagrave complex cost £95 million to build, and that opened in 2020. The facility sits on 185 acres and contains more than 20 playing surfaces, accommodation, rehabilitation centres, media facilities, and indoor arenas. Maybe Leicester is not a prime example given their relegation predicament. Let's go on to somewhere like Tottenham. I know, but their training centre costs around £100 million. So if West Ham are serious about creating a modern football campus on a large site in Basildon, we're probably talking around, I don't know, I'm guessing 80 to 150 million pounds. Still a huge amount of money, but spread over maybe 3 or 4 years, it becomes very manageable for an owner with Kretinsky's resources. And here's the thing, infrastructure spending doesn't count against profitability and sustainability rules, PSR. So unlike transfer fees, for example, which affect PSR calculations or will affect future SCR calculations, investment in facilities is actually encouraged, which means Kretinsky, if he wanted, could fund the project personally. The club could borrow against future revenues, or they could structure the project over several phases. Land purchase would be the first thing, then get planning permission, main building the third, additional pitches and academy facilities later. This doesn't have to be one giant checkbook written overnight. And perhaps more interestingly of all, West Ham already possess assets which could help fund part of that project. Rush Green itself occupies something like 29-30 acres. Little Heath has considerable value. Chadwell Heath remains a desirable East London location. So depending on planning status and future use, selling or redeveloping those 3 sites could potentially raise tens of millions of pounds, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 million pounds in total. Nobody knows for certain because land values depend heavily on what planning permission can be achieved. But if residential or mixed-use development became possible, the numbers increased dramatically. Suddenly, an £80 million to £120 million project or £150 million project to build a state-of-the-art one central training complex, if you take off 50, 60, 70 million pounds of that, it becomes perfectly achievable by selling the land that we have. Then there's timing. People should understand, or must really understand, that these projects aren't going to happen quickly. As I've said, you've got to get the land acquisition, then surveys, then planning permission, design work, construction, and so on. Leicester's training complex took almost 3 years from breaking ground to actually opening the complex itself. Tottenham's took a similar amount of time. So you're looking at potentially a 3-year project. And realistically, if the Basildon site has already been identified, supporters are looking at what? Land acquisition and planning this year, approval and preparation next year, construction in 2028, maybe opening in 2029. And yeah, that sounds like a long time, but remember, if completed, West Ham will be building something that's going to serve the club for what? The next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and not the next 2 or 3 years. And perhaps that's what makes the whole thing quite exciting, because it isn't about winning the championship next season. Oh, that's important. But it's also about building the foundations for West Ham to finally operate like one of the England's biggest clubs. And when you look at Daniel Kretinsky's history at Sparta Prague, that sort of long-term investment is not fantasy. It's actually exactly what he tends to do with his businesses. Let's talk about another thing. What about the stadium rumours? Well, this is where things become, I think, a little bit more speculative. Talk of buying the London Stadium and its surrounding land sounds very ambitious, and perhaps that's exactly what it is. But it's not impossible. We've always known that the biggest weakness in West Ham's model is we don't own our own home. That limits revenue, it limits control, it limits identity, and owning the stadium would change everything. But supporters should understand something. This is probably a much longer term conversation, years rather than months in the making. And I would caution against expecting miracles when it comes to the stadium, because negotiations with the current ownership are going to be complex. But would Kretinsky be interested? I don't doubt it. I've no doubt he would. He's an investor, and investors like tangible assets, and controlling the stadium would be transformational. So whilst I wouldn't treat it as an imminent thing, I wouldn't dismiss it either. Another area that should encourage supporters is governance. For years, supporters have complained about communication, about feeling ignored, about decisions appearing to happen behind closed doors. Now, since Karen Brady's departure and Karim Varani's arrival, there seems to be a completely different atmosphere. More dialogue, more willingness to engage, and that matters because fans should not necessarily be running a football club, but they should feel as if they're part of the process. And they should also feel that their views are respected. And right now, many fans are saying that they feel far more listened to than they have done in years. So, should we be cautious about all of this? Well, first and foremost, Daniel Kretinsky is a billionaire, but he isn't a Roman Abramovich who used to throw money around like confetti. He isn't going to spend hundreds of millions every summer. It's not his model. His history at Sparta Prague shows patience, long-term thinking, not endless spending. Secondly, football success takes time. Sparta Prague supporters waited years before seeing their rewards. There were mistakes, there were bad appointments made. I can't remember I did see the figure. Can't remember how many managers Sparta Prague have had in the time that Kretinsky's been there, but it's been in the double figures. There have been periods of disappointment, and West Ham supporters should expect a few bumps in the road. There are going to be setbacks. Who knows? We might not get promoted at first time of asking. And so there's going to be frustration too. And thirdly, we've got to remember 43% ownership isn't necessarily, well, definitely isn't 100%. Although voting agreements mean his influence is going to be substantial, he still operates within a broader ownership structure. Complete control remains a future question, one which may be answered sooner rather than later. But there's something else that makes me positive. People who know Kretinsky often describe him as a footballing man, not just a businessman who happens to own a football club. He's a football supporter, someone who's emotionally invested. Certainly at Sparta Prague, and I hope he'll be similarly invested at West Ham. So he would be someone who hopefully genuinely cares. And that matters too, because for years, West Ham fans have often felt that footballing decisions were secondary to balance sheets. Now, maybe now there's a chance for something different. No reckless spending, no fantasy, no proper footballing thinking. But I'm also not stupid enough to think that Kretinsky is doing this or maybe doing all this for the love only of West Ham. This investment of his has been damaged because of relegation. He's doing and saying absolutely the right things to get West Ham back up the Premier League, and as soon as possible, let's hope, because it'll protect his investment. And once we're back up there, there's no way of knowing whether he'll stay for the longer term, or he may certainly cash in and make a very decent profit on his investment. So what is real? Keeping players, backing Nuno, injection of financial support, all real. Training ground investment, very realistic. Better communication with the fan base, already happening. Long-term infrastructure improvements, very likely. And what might be a little bit more aspirational is things like buying the stadium and redeveloping the area completely. Transforming the London Stadium into one of Europe's great footballing homes is the hope. It's possible, but as I've said, probably a far longer project. We could, of course, encourage the current stadium owners to agree to making changes that would make a difference and there would be immediate benefits. Designated safe standing areas, neutral zones, or should I say P1 travel zones, family zones. Why not move the away fans to the upper tiers and have the home fans in the lower tiers? Newcastle United do that. Bringing down the awful wall that separates the home and away fans. Many ideas that have been raised before but been dismissed by Karen Brady. But whatever happens from here on in, we have to be patient as a fan base. We cannot expect everything is going to be done overnight. But on the whole, I think West Ham supporters are entitled to feel optimistic, not because someone has promised the moon, not because we're suddenly going to become the next Man City overnight, but because for the first time in a long time, there seems to be a strategy. There appears to be alignment, there appears to be stability, and perhaps most importantly, there appears to be ambition backed by resource. Will everything work? Probably not. Will mistakes be made? Absolutely. But if you look at the evidence, if you look at Sparta Prague, if you look at what happened over the last week or so, and if you look at West Ham, and if you look at the messages coming from the club, I think there's one conclusion. West Ham United might finally be entering an era where decisions are being made with the next 10, 15, 20 years in mind, rather than simply the next transfer window or the next season. And after everything that's happened this summer, there's real hope, that there's real reason for hope. And hope is when it's backed by evidence, and that's never a bad thing.